Stanley Road, Blackpool, a Monday evening in August, 1953. Ellen Whitfield is 38, a spinner's wife from a terrace street off Bridgeman Street in Bolton. She has just come off the excursion train with her husband and two children, a case in each hand, and she is standing on a boarding house step, waiting for the door to open. This is the fortnight the mill shuts for. She has been waiting for it since November. Nobody in Bolton uses the word holiday the way people elsewhere do. In a cotton town, the word means one specific thing. The week, sometimes the fortnight, when the mill engine stops, the machinery is oiled and inspected, and the whole town, not one family, the whole town, it gets on trains to the same handful of resorts. The expansion of the railway network turned Blackpool into a seaside resort that catered mainly for the Lancashire working classes, while other towns' textile workers filled Southport and Morecambe instead. By 1860, more than 23,000 people were traveling from Oldham to Blackpool by train in a single wakes week, and Bolton's mill workers were making the same journey in roughly the same numbers, to the same week, year after year. Vam Cambridge Core Ellen has booked this room by letter since March. The landlady knows her name before she says it. What was Ellen actually buying? 11 months in advance for a room she'd never seen photographed and a landlady she'd only ever corresponded with? Before you can understand what a room at at any Blackpool landladies, was actually worth to Ellen Whitfield, you need to understand what a boarding house was as an institution, not a building. Between 1937 and 1940, the research organization Mass Observation carried out an extended study of Bolton and Blackpool together, recording ordinary people's behavior and conversation in the street, the pub, the dance hall, the mill, and on holiday, treating the mill town and its holiday resort as one continuous social system, not two separate places. That's the key fact the researchers understood, and this channel tries to honor. Blackpool didn't make sense without Bolton behind it, and Bolton's whole working year bent toward the fortnight in Blackpool. Archives Hub, the boarding house, sat in the middle of that system. It wasn't a hotel. There was no menu, no choice of room, often no choice of what was for tea. There was a landlady who ran a strict published timetable, meals at fixed hours, guests out of the house between breakfast and lunch, back in by 10, and in exchange for surrendering that control, a Milltown mother got something she could not get in her own kitchen on Bridgeman Street. A hot meal she had not cooked, served to her at a table she hadn't laid. CTA number 1. Before we continue, if this kind of documentation is what you've been looking for, consider subscribing. Every video on this channel goes into one specific piece of the British seaside holiday between 1920 and 1980. The boarding house, the promenade, the pier show, the Wakes Week train, and what each of these actually did for the people who built their year around a fortnight booked in November. Not nostalgia for kiss-me-quick hats. What a landlady's dining room at 7 o'clock gave a woman who cooked every other meal of her year, and what it did not give a family that same landlady turned away at the door for the color of their skin. If your family took these holidays, tell us where and which decade in the comments. Next time, what happened to the Blackpool boarding house street after 1965? Back to the promenade. So, what did that timetable, that surrendered control, actually buy her? And what did it mean that Ellen could buy it and other families standing at other doors on the same street that same week could not? What the boarding house gave Ellen Whitfield: a fortnight of not being the person who cooked, cleaned, and minded the mill clock. The dining room at 7 was the meal she hadn't made. The rule about being back by 10 was, oddly, a kind of freedom. It meant the rest of the day belonged to no one's schedule but her own. What it gave other families standing at other Stanley Road doors that same August: nothing, and a closed door. Refusing accommodation on grounds of race wasn't unusual in Britain in this period. It happened in ordinary housing as much as in holiday lettings. The press at the time described a continuing British color bar in housing, and though it wasn't written into law the way segregation was in the United States, its effects were comparable. Signs weren't always subtle. One surviving 1959 London flat advertisement stated plainly that it was for a married couple only, and specified no colored. Blackpool's boarding house streets operated on exactly the same informal landlady by landlady discretion. No law compelled a Stanley Road landlady to take a family she didn't want, and for a black British family traveling up from Manchester or Liverpool for their own Wakes Week, that meant working out in advance, often by word of mouth, which doors on which streets would actually open. AOL, both things are true about the same institution in the same week. The boarding house that gave Ellen Whitfield 14 days of not cooking, and the boarding house 2 doors down that would not give a Jamaican railway worker's family a bed, no matter how far they had come or how long they had saved. What did the family that was turned away do instead? Walk on, try the next street, or turn around and get back on the train? 10 o'clock Tuesday morning, the promenade. Ellen has a hired deck chair. Third row back from the railings, the same spot the attendant gave her last year because she asked for it again. Her husband has the paper. The children are already at the water with the bucket bought in March. This is the part of the fortnight that has no equivalent in Bolton at all. An hour, a whole morning, with nowhere she has to be and nothing that needs her. Bolton doesn't have a promenade because Bolton doesn't have that kind of time. The mile of paved seafront, the rented chairs, the ice cream stalls, the donkeys on the sand, all of it exists to give a working household something a working household cannot generate for itself. Unscheduled time, taken publicly, in the company of everyone else's unscheduled time. Not every family walked the same promenade the same way, though. Where a family chose to sit, which stretch of front they used, which resort they came to at all, said something about where they placed themselves. Blackpool's Golden Mile was built loud, cheap, and communal on purpose. Full boarding houses, full sand, full noise, because that was what a mill town wanted from its 1 week off. Further down the coast, Bournemouth and Torquay built themselves quieter, with clifftop gardens and a different social address for families who wanted their fortnight to say something different about them. The promenade wasn't neutral ground. It was a mirror the size of a whole town, and everyone on it that August knew roughly which reflection they were standing in. What was Ellen actually looking at? Sitting in that chair with nothing to do, and what would it have meant to lose the ability to sit in it? Before you can understand what the Wakes Week system meant for a resort town's whole year, you need to understand what it looked like from the other side of the boarding house door. The landlady wasn't a supporting character in Ellen Whitfield's holiday. She was running a small business that had to earn most of its year's income across a handful of summer weeks, filled almost entirely by the same returning families, arriving in the same order from the same mill towns on the same excursion timetables. Because the whole Lancashire and Yorkshire Wakes Week calendar was staggered, town by town, so that Blackpool absorbed one town's population 1 week and the next town's the week after. A landlady who kept the booking letters knew, before a family arrived, which room they'd ask for, which child didn't eat fish, and whether the father would want his tea at 6:30 sharp or would sit reading the paper until it went cold. That knowledge was the actual product being sold, as much as the bed was. It's also, later in this story, the first thing to disappear. Because it can't be replicated by a hotel apartment in Majorca that has never met the family before and will never see them again. What happens to a business and a town built entirely on the fact that the same people keep coming back once they stop? Wednesday evening, the pier. This is the one night of the fortnight the family dresses for, as the boarding house has no occasion that requires it, but the end-of-pier theater does. A comedian, a singer, a juggler between the acts, a program that barely changes from one summer season to the next because the audience doesn't want it to. The pier show isn't there to surprise anyone. It's there to be reliably exactly what it was last August, so the children have something to talk about on the way back to Bridgeman Street in September and something to look forward to buying tickets for again next March. The performers themselves lived a strange, seasonal version of the same system the holidaymakers did. Summer season contracts, the same resort, the same weeks, year after year, their own working year built around exactly the 11 weeks that Ellen's was built around too, just from the stage side of the footlights instead of the stalls. What did it mean for the resort and for the family both, that the whole of this, the pier, the promenade, the boarding house, was designed to be exactly the same reliably every single August? Now the competing force. A travel agent's window on a Bolton High Street sometime around 1966 or 1967. The Thomson Travel Group had been formed in 1965 when the Canada-based Thomson Corporation bought up four existing tour operators and merged them into Britain's largest package holiday company. And by the later 1960s, its brochures, full-board fortnights to Spain, flight included, were sitting in the same travel agent windows where families like Ellen's had once only ever booked excursion train tickets. Holiday hypermarket. The arithmetic mattered more than the sunshine at first. Rival operator Clarkson's was already selling full-board fortnights to Spain, Portugal, Italy, and Greece for under £40 a head, a price that, for a growing number of Lancashire households, sat close enough to a Blackpool boarding house fortnight to make the comparison worth making at all. What the package holiday offered instead: a guaranteed hotel pool, guaranteed sun, a flight instead of a 5-hour excursion train. Wikipedia. What it did not, and structurally could not offer: a landlady who already knew which room to give you before you asked, a deck chair attendant who kept your row, a pier comedian whose act the children could quote from memory by September. The Costa Brava Hotel had never met the family before and had no reason to remember them after they left. Meanwhile, the trains that had carried Wakes Week families to the coast for a century were themselves under threat. Richard Beeching's 1963 report identified more than 2,300 stations and 5,000 miles of railway line for closure, 55% of Britain's stations. And while the report's stated target was unprofitable branch lines generally, seasonal seaside services, busy for 3 months and nearly empty the rest of the year, were exactly the kind of traffic the report's economics penalized hardest. One peer raised in Parliament's debate on the report that boarding house and hotel keepers had no formal right to be heard by the committees deciding these closures, even though the closures could do them serious economic harm. UK Transport Wiki Cornwall Heritage. So the two forces arrived at roughly the same moment: cheaper, sunnier competition from abroad, and a shrinking rail network at home, making some of the older resort towns simply harder to reach. Neither one on its own ended the Wakes Week fortnight. Together, across the following decade, they did. What was actually lost in the arithmetic that made a Spanish hotel pool cheaper than a Blackpool boarding house? Something the pool itself was never designed to replace. Ellen Whitfield's daughter took her own children to Spain in the 1970s. The flight was 2.5 hours. The apartment had a balcony and a shared pool, and nobody there knew which room the family liked or asked after the children by name. She sent a postcard back to Bolton. It said the weather was marvelous. Mrs. Bottomley's, the boarding house on the corner of Stanley Road, run by 3 generations of the same family since the 1930s, took its last Wakes Week booking sometime in the mid-1970s. Nobody wrote the exact date down. Nobody thought, at the time, that it would turn out to be the last one. The dining room went quiet by degrees, not all at once. A table unlaid here, a room advertised as a bedsit there, until one August, there simply weren't enough families coming back to fill it. The promenade is still there. The deck chairs are still for hire. What's gone isn't the Seaside. It's the particular permanent thing the Seaside used to organize. A whole mill town's year, bent for 11 weeks around the same landladies, the same trains, the same pier comedian, families who came back to the same room so many times that being remembered by name, on arrival, was simply what a holiday was. The Spanish apartment gave Ellen Whitfield's daughter something real and good: sun, without saving all year for it, without a curfew, without asking a stranger's permission to book a room in November. That's not a small thing, and this channel isn't here to tell you it was a worse holiday. It was a different kind of arrangement entirely. It simply never needed to know what a boarding house dining room at 7 o'clock had spent 40 years learning about the families who sat down at it. CTA number 2. If this channel is going to keep documenting what the British seaside holiday actually was and meant to the people who built their year around it, subscribe. There are more boarding houses, more piers, more Wakes Week trains, and more landladies who knew your room before you asked for it. What a landlady's dining room at 7 o'clock gave a Milltown family a package holiday apartment was never built to provide. And if your family has a boarding house, a pier, a promenade, a fortnight of its own, tell us where and when in the comments. Next time on this channel, what happened to the Blackpool boarding houses that didn't close? and what they became instead.